Spirituality is obviously a very big part of my life. But the thing is that it has been for like 10 years. It's not new for me. And so it is in everything that I do. And it informs like a lot of my life, right? It's how I make my money in my career. It's how I make friends with common interests, right? It's also how like I enjoy things. It influences how I enjoy things like food and sex and art and music and humor, right? It's all over my life. And so when I was sitting down to make this and I was like, okay, well, what are the practices that like actually had an impact on your life? Like what changed your life? I wanted to like naturally answer everything and just say everything, but that's not a good answer, one. And I also just firmly believe that spirituality does not have to be complicated. And in this case, it's like, if you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, like, do you really understand it? So I took the challenge and was like, okay, what are the actual practices, habits that had an impact on my life, that actually changed my life, like tangibly really made it so that I was living better every day? And, letting myself sort of expand that definition of like a spiritual practice versus a spiritual tool. And this is what I came up with. And I think this is an interesting list. Hello and welcome back to It's Queer Magic. If you're new here, hi. Hello, I'm Kierbo, they, them. Nice to meet you. On this channel, we talk about queerness and magic and witchcraft and spirituality and liberation and anything that we want to. We have a silly good time being ourselves and trying to get wiser, love deeper, and just literally live better every single day. So if that's your bag, if you're interested, if you like what you see, stick around. We're happy to have you. Welcome home. Today we're talking about the spiritual habits, the practices that changed my life. And the first one was a surprise for me when I first encountered it. I was changed by altar building and maintenance. So when I first built my altar, which was actually one of the first things that I was drawn to about witchcraft because it just seemed nice, fun, and exciting and aesthetic. When I first built my altar, it not only made me feel like connected and spiritual, but it actually really was creatively fulfilling in a time in my life when I felt completely devoid of any kind of creative fulfillment or skill or ability. Like I spent my whole life in performing, even at a super young age, right? When I was a literal baby, I was doing beauty pageants. And then I went to a performing arts program at my high school. I went on to musical theater college, right? I thought this was going to be my whole life. And by the time I graduated that college, I was like really burnt out. And I didn't even understand like what that word meant. And I had not heard the word neurodivergent yet. I was just at the end of my rope. And so I panicked and I thought that I lost my skill and my talent, but more scarily, I thought I lost my like spark for life. And that was a horrifying experience. And I was just sort of accepting it. And I built my first altar, right? And I set down this space that I cleared out just for this purpose. I cleaned it and prepared it. The act of like arranging these items that meant something to me on this space that I prepared really lit me up, and I just didn't expect it to scratch that creative itch. And it really did and continued to fulfill me. And I will literally never forget like the first time that I stepped back and I stood in front of my Walmart like particle board black bookcase that I'd set my altar on top of and witnessed it and felt something. And I really felt something. Like I felt connected, I felt lit up, and I just felt alive. And that was revolutionary for me. But that's not what changed my life. What happened is that I felt amazing, right? And you'll never really replicate that high, that first time where you're like, magic is real. Oh, magic is real. It has like a special magic, the newness magic, the first time magic, right? That can't be replicated. But what happened was I set this altar up. It was beautiful. I loved it. And then I left it alone. And what happened is what always happens. It got dusty, it got crusty, it got musty, and it got cluttered. And I felt it. And I was like, that's sad. I must be bad at this. Weird place to jump to, but it's where I jumped to. And honestly, like, I don't remember whose video I was watching and who said this, but I remember watching a video on YouTube back in the day, like literally 10 years ago. And they were saying that the altar is like the physical manifestation of your internal landscape. And I was like, oh, click. Oh, and I looked over to my altar because I was in the same room, and I was like, noted. I got up, I cleaned it, and I arranged it, and I felt better. And I didn't keep that habit. I went right back to messy immediately, right? It was just a cycle I was in for so long. And I really felt the consequences of that. Like, when it was cluttered and it was dusty and it was chaotic, I felt like miserable and chaotic in a bad way and really distracted in my head and just like not together. And I had to ask myself, why am I building an altar? What do I want out of this? What's the point? And I found out that the answer was that I wanted to connect to myself and I wanted to connect to my magic. And because those things were important to me, I decided that altar building was important to me. And so I made time for it, and I sort of forced it to be a part of my routine. And it wasn't perfect, it wasn't every week all the time. It took a while to get to a routine that worked for me, and that meant that it was keeping nice and keeping organized, right? And that routine, coming back to the altar, continuing to maintain and upkeep it, that is what changed my life, because I was checking in with myself. I had a connection. I was like, if I don't feel good, what does my altar look like in my mind? And I was easily able to be like, okay, that's where I start. And not only did it turn into a routine of caring for the space, it turned into a routine of caring for my mind and my own body and my energetic body. So cleaning this altar, connecting with it, making sure I was spending time at the altar, not just having it built, really did influence my connection to myself, and more importantly, my connection to my own spirit and my own magic. It made it something tangible. So many of us, I feel like, are really looking for something that we can hold, and that's it's rare, sometimes rare in the like witchcraft magical world, when so many of the elements of this are like mental, right? And having that sensation, the feeling of having my magic in my hands, like, whew, changed me. It made my spell work matter. It made the process of being like a magical person mean something. It wasn't just an idea. It wasn't just witchcraft. It was step one, step two. Build the altar, maintain the altar, visit the altar, connect to the altar. And now, 10 years later, I build altars and I keep them. 10 years later, it's the practice that grounds me into right now and grounds me into myself. And it's where I go. It's like my home base. It's my own sacred space just for myself. It's where I go to cry and feel difficult feelings. It's where I go to celebrate. It's where I go when I need some quiet and to hear my own thoughts. It's where I go when I need help and I'm just reaching out into the fucking universe, right? Even when I'm not cognizant enough to be directly asking my spirits or my ancestors or my guides, when I'm just low and crying out for anything, I know that I'm safe at my altar. I know that there are spirits that are connected to my altar. I have entertained my own guides and ancestors. I've entertained deities and angels and different nature beings just as a relationship building, right? Acquaintances. It is the most powerful place in my life. I think that it's special. So building the altar was important, but maintaining the altar, upkeep, going back and making it a routine to visit the altar and do work, journaling, tarot, whatever I was doing at that space was the very first thing that shifted my perspective and allowed me to actually operate in the world in a different way and operate with myself in a different way, because I had finally crafted a space for me that was safe and mine and connected to me. And so I highly recommend building an altar, but I even more recommend keeping and maintaining an altar. In my early witchcraft days, I really wanted to connect to the earth, right? It's definitely something that like is very common. You break open Wicca books or even just witchcraft books or any other sort of practice, they're sort of really emphasizing the importance of the planet, right? Which makes sense. But I felt really uncomfortable and afraid to do that. I didn't feel like I was connected to the planet. I felt like I was an invader or an invasive species on this planet. Like I felt like it didn't want me here, right? Because I'm a millennial, right? So when I was being raised, it started off with a little bit of like climate disaster messaging and then just got increasingly serious. So my whole life, it's like everything's horrible. We're destroying the planet, which isn't false, right? And it's important to know those things because we can't ignore it. But it didn't give me, like, those messages didn't give me any sense that it was something that I could even have an impact on. And it certainly did not empower me. And when it came to witchcraft and connecting to the earth, I felt like a bad witch, right? I wanted to be good. I just didn't feel like I was a part of it. I didn't understand it. And the messaging was so overwhelmingly negative and terrifying that I just felt like, don't look at that. And so no matter what, like all of my Indigenous elders growing up were trying to teach me about my place on the planet, like sometimes society is just louder, you know, and if you're raised disconnected from these people, there was not enough reinforcement to keep that in my mind. And the thing that changed was actually reading. I know, but specifically reading nature nonfiction and nature books. And I get that that might sound like, oh, that's like sciencey, that's like homework. And I get it, and I felt the same way. But there are so many books that are written for the average person who's like not a scientist to teach us about the cycles of the planet, to teach us about the systems that are built into this beautiful freaking earth that we live on. It was reading those books that really gave me a sense of connection and helped to shift my perspective, and not just to like know as a thought that I might be connected because I'm a part of the planet, but it helped make it an embodied experience. And that might not be the same for everybody, you know, like it is something that you should go feel in real life with your toes in the dirt and your body, like your skin feeling the rain and the sun. Like that's important and it is a big part of it. But that wasn't possible for me because I was really afraid that the planet just wanted me gone because I was a human, you know, I was an invader. Like they don't want me here. They don't love me. They are in pain because of me and my people, right? But reading these books really helps to put it in perspective. And, you know, I won't sugarcoat it. It is bad. There is anger and grief, intense grief in every root system on the planet. There's anger and grief and pain and sorrow. Absolutely. But the earth still sees us as one of their children. We are a part of the network. We're a part of the systems. And now I'm in a place, after reading these books and connecting with the planet on my own terms, I feel very sure and certain that when humanity retakes their role, their rightful place as like creator and caretaker gods on this planet, that everything is regeneratable. Like we can come back from this. It doesn't make it less dire. It just says that there is a path forward, which means that we need to take it, right? If the path forward exists, you sort of have to take it. I feel like so much of the information from powers that be, from the governments, from whatever, are like, it's so bad. So we can't try. There's nothing to do. It's over. Sorry. Just because they want to keep raking in profits. But knowing the truth of the nature of these cycles and these systems makes you have a sense of agency and influence, and it helps you find your voice. It helped me absolutely find my voice and find my connection to the planet and my space in the like activist sphere. And honestly, if you were to read one book, I think that I would recommend Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And if you can get the audiobook, even better, because she narrates it herself, and her storytelling ability, her scientific knowledge, and her heart that she puts into this, like it's woven together with such a skilled hand and such a like open and vulnerable heart that it's like blended with science and personal narrative, and it will hit home for you. Her skill, her connection, her perspective, I think is something that everybody should read. Get it from your library, even get the audio from your library. Listen, support the library or buy it. It's a worthwhile investment. The next nature nonfiction that's on my list to read is called Fresh Banana Leaves: Healing Indigenous Landscapes Through Indigenous Science by Jessica Hernandez. And I'm very excited about this. I haven't started it yet, but that's the next one on my list. And I guess let me know if you want to hear my thoughts, or if you want that good booktube content from me. We can get into that and I'll let you know how it goes. But that's on my list and I'm very excited to read it. Honestly, nature nonfiction changed my life. It connected me to my magic. It connected me to my planet. And it's important that it becomes a habit, because you will understand just what's possible when it comes to the thriving of everything that lives on the planet and how everything is necessary. And if that's too far for you, get to a documentary, right? Watch a documentary. Just see how nature plays out. But ultimately, just make sure that you are including Indigenous to Turtle Island at least. Like if you're an American, Indigenous to this land, reading their perspectives, reading Indigenous authors, especially Indigenous scientists, will really shift your perspective to something that is more rooted in the truth, in my opinion. Nature nonfiction changed my life, and it is a spiritual practice that continues to root me into my purpose and into reality and into a deeper connection with the land that I live on and the land of the planet altogether. This next one might sound a little like, okay, wow, I don't know how I'm going to do that. But I think that it's possible. I have ADHD and I am autistic. And so there is two wolves battling inside of me, and they both agree that it should be difficult. But really, one of the things that I'm most uncomfortable with, that I have a fear about, is obviously one of the things that you literally can't do anything about on this planet. And that is change, things changing. Horrible, I wanted to be friends with change. I really did. And it just wasn't realistic for me. Even just that phrasing made me angry, because it is something that is almost painful for me sometimes, depending on what's changing, depending on how it changes, it can spin me out completely. And there's nothing I could do about that. Change is a god on this planet. It is one of the few things that we can rely on. And even then, that could change. What I found was that shifting my perspective from becoming a friend with change, because I know that's how we're supposed to feel, right? As spiritual people, oh yes, change is my best friend. I love it. I surf the waves. And that's amazing if that's you. I literally love that for you. I'm so happy for you. That's not my experience. My experience has now become, instead of shifting, or instead of befriending change, I have shifted my perspective to surrendering to change, because it takes the demand away a little bit, where it's I have to learn to love this. I don't have to learn to love it. I just have to learn to go along with it. I have to learn to let it lead me, to let it hold me, and to let it guide me. And you may be thinking okay, that's not a spiritual practice, but you're wrong. You're wrong. No, you know what? The idea of hearing just surrender to change, that might not be a spiritual practice. But for me, surrendering to change is an active choice that I make every day. It's something that I have had to make a habit, to remind myself that my choices are rooted in surrendering to this change. And it means a lot of things, and it could mean a lot of things to you. To me, it means doing hard things, even though they are hard, right? Having difficult conversations that I know need to happen, or that are rooted in respect for everyone involved. Doing things that I am called to do, even though it feels like the opposite of the thing I want to do. It means trusting myself. It means, like I said, trying new things, but also trying to repeat the things I know that are good for me when they are feeling less accessible. Surrendering to change is letting it really be the habit and the routine that builds a structure around me that can hold me up when I'm feeling like I can't hold myself up. And if I can't hold myself up, change is going to be there. Because some change really does ask you to just let go and let God, let go and let God. And that is sometimes easy and sometimes hard. And some change is asking you to literally just be brave and do the thing that you want to do. Some change is trying to help you and get you, because you're going down a direction that is not going to get you where you want to go, or is not going to be good for you. And the change comes out of nowhere to help you, right? Sometimes change is your guides and it's guiding you. And sometimes it's literally just trying to answer a prayer. The part that makes it a spiritual practice that is revolutionary for me is absolutely the choice. It's not something I've just changed and I am someone who loves change. I actually just have to say, okay, I don't like this. okay, I'm coming up against an uncomfortable feeling. I don't enjoy this ending, or I don't enjoy the fact that this is temporary. And then I remind myself as often as I can that I have chosen a path of surrendering to change. And if that's who I'm going to be, that's who I say I am, I have to walk the talk. And so I do difficult stuff. And it's allowed me to grow so far beyond what I thought was possible for me, and so far beyond my comfort zone. Like, your comfort zone just expands, you know? And, you know, sometimes it doesn't expand and you're uncomfortable, but you've learned to do it even though you're uncomfortable. And that, to me, is freedom. That's real freedom. And honestly, what is spirituality for if it's not about freedom? Surrendering to change is difficult. It is. It's difficult. And that's why it's a routine. And maybe one day it'll come naturally to me and I won't think about it. And, you know, maybe one day it won't. Maybe it will always be something that I perpetually do. But honestly, if, as the saying goes, you are what you do, then I am guided by change, and I'll always be guided by change. And I've always been guided by change, whether it was consensual or not, whether it was, right, something I was aware of, conscious or not. I've always been. And if I've always been guided by change, and I'm here now, and there are so many things about my life that I enjoy, even though it's not perfect, I can continue to be at least on board. I don't have to be okay with it, but I can at least be on board with continuing to be guided by change. And knowing that change is so powerful and bigger than me, and there's no need to fight a losing battle, just surrender to the things that are. It allows me to be present. It allows me to really enjoy what's happening in front of me, because change is a guarantee. It may not always be here, or who knows what's coming next. So the suffering I'm experiencing now, there's no need for me to extend it into future forever and ever. This is just how it is, because I know that change will always be there. It may not get better, it may not get worse, but it will get different. And if I know that I can rely on that, I can plan for it, I can lean into it and try to make the best out of my life every single day. So while that may be a little bit of a broad topic, I still think that it's something that actually has had a tangible impact on my life. That intentional, habitual routine of surrendering to change helped me become who I am today, and I would not have done it differently. Okay, now we're getting into something that I think is like a little bit more of a tool that might be what you were even looking for when you clicked on this. I was really into witches as a kid, but more specifically, I was very much into psychics and diviners and seers. Even when I was really afraid of it, I was always very drawn to the idea, the archetype, the character of someone who could see into the future, into the other world, could see mystery, could make meaning out of mysteries. People talking about having visions, right? Secret messages from spirit, right? Being communicated with and using their tools to see things. And I was also really excited by the idea that that could mean that some of my experiences as a kid of like constant deja vu, or having very mundane dreams about everyday stuff that was a little bit different, and then having it almost always come true. I was really into the idea that that could mean something, you know? So when I started doing these like guided meditations and like shaman style journeyings, is what people would call them back then, I was really frustrated and angry because it didn't work for me. It wasn't easy. And because it was so disappointing when it came to like the kind of visions I was having, and people were talking about having these wild experiences with these guided meditations and stuff, and I just wasn't doing it. It wasn't happening for me, and that made it boring. And because it was boring, I was not getting anywhere, because I would not come back to it. Again, ADHD, there was no novelty, there was no stimuli, and it was impossible to stick to. And that was really, like I said, really frustrating, because it was one of the things I wanted. And there was a big part of me on the inside that felt drawn to that stuff, right? I knew it was an area that I was meant to be. And so it was wildly frustrating that I couldn't do it. What changed for me was letting myself not be good at those meditations and stop forcing myself to do them, because it wasn't getting me anywhere and it was just boring. Instead, I looked up smaller, shorter visualization practices, right? Tools, small techniques that I could practice easier to gain those skills. I looked them up online, I looked them up in witch books, and eventually started making my own where I would practice the muscle of visualization. Because that is the secret, that it isn't just some skill. Like, yes, people have it, just like some people can sing really well early on, and some people have to try really hard. Both of them have to practice either way. Both of them have to learn how to do it. Doing these little techniques, these little practices helped me to build that muscle so that when I finally returned to those longer guided meditations and spirit world journeying, that's when I was getting somewhere and I was having beautiful, inspiring, incredible visions and incredible experiences in these meditations that led to my clairvoyance coming into play, my clairsentience, my psychic ability, my ability to speak and interpret with spirits and interpret secret messages. And it's really when the tarot started making more tangible sense to me as a tool for divination, right? That's when it all came together. It wasn't just I woke up and was great at being a psychic. It took work. And, one of the practices I remember doing, I remember I would envision in my mind's eye with my eyes closed, I would see myself drawing a pentacle, right? And it would be in different materials, and I would go through the elements. So I'd start with fire and I would draw it in flames, right? And then I would hold it in my vision and see it there, not just a still image, but alive and burning, right? And the more detail I could hold, the better. And then I would undo that one and then redo it in vining plants and in water and in wind, right? So I would go through the elements and just try to see these pentacles and hold them there. And that practice really built up my muscle and allowed me to be communicated to through that skill set. And, some people might be like, that's your imagination. And I would say, yeah, it literally is. Yes, absolutely. That's the same muscle. That's the same screen. If your imagination is your internal TV screen, you can put things on that screen, and also so can other energies that have your consent to do so, right? You can communicate through that screen. So many, I would wager most clairvoyants aren't seeing things in space with their eyes. They're seeing it on their internal mind screen. And it is wild. It's a lot. It can be super intense. It can be the tiniest little whiff, but it's an incredible experience. And that, again, it requires practice. You have to keep trying. You have to keep going. You have to try these tools, these smaller little practice routines until you can finally get to the meditations that everyone talks about being so incredible that are an hour long. I think it's really unfair to expect yourself to go from not meditating at all to spirit world journeying for an hour and a half and communicating with the ancients, right? I think it's fine to start with exercising first. You might not be able to run a marathon until you train for it. And if this is the same concept, and I see so many people giving up because a 40-minute meditation, they didn't see anything or they fell asleep. That's okay. One, you likely needed that sleep. Sorry. But also, it just takes practice. It's a muscle that needs to be conditioned. And that changed me. Letting myself just practice with no stakes is what made that muscle strong and what changed my life completely. Now, I fully am psychic. And I've always been psychic, but I haven't been able to use it. Now I can use it on purpose. Now I can look into the energies when I want to. Now I work as a psychic. I work as a tarot reader. I have visions. I lead meditations. I lead them. Excuse me? I never would have thought I was doing that, but I am. And I am good at it. And I get so many beautiful messages during meditation because I allowed myself to get better at it. So if you are frustrated like I was and the meditations are long and hard and boring and so you can't repeat them, just try shorter practices, shorter techniques is the word I'm looking for, to practice your visualization. I think that you'll be surprised. And honestly, the other thing that was really, really valuable when it comes to practicing visualization is reading. Reading fiction. Reading nonfiction is great, like I said earlier, but reading fiction will help you build a whole image in your mind, and you'll do so much more visualization so that you can fill in your inner world with more color and more texture so that you have so much more to play with when it comes to spirits using your mind's eye to deliver information. And it becomes an invaluable tool. Honestly, it's one of the best things that I've ever experienced, and I highly recommend every single human being get involved in visualization, in guided meditation, in spirit world journeying, if that's what you're called to do. You will be blown away with the insights that you get. And for me, changed my life, complete 180. If you would not mind, I would be very grateful to get a little bit more personal. Okay. So I grew up in a really chaotic environment in a dysfunctional family of abuse and neglect and all sorts of fun things. And I was belittled, I was ignored, and that was a big wound for me for a long time. And like I said, like I am autistic, but I'm also, spiritually connected. I was a bright kid. And so I would see the adults in my life making choices that were just to me so obviously going to continue a cycle of pain and suffering, right? I was like, that's obviously the wrong move. Why can you not see it? I can see it. It's painfully obvious. I'm a child. Like, you should definitely be able to see it. And I was shot down. I was screamed at. I was ignored. Whenever I would try to bring that up, it would raise hell for me to be like, this is wrong and I'm right. And to demand that I was right was a big mistake in my household. I was punished for it. And so growing up, I turned into a pretty defensive adult. And that defensiveness led to me having really difficult relationships with people. I was also wildly desperate to be approved and to be liked. I grew up very different, like I said, in my own household. But then I also, for a long time, lived in Southern Orange County, where it wasn't cool to be poor. It wasn't cool to be brown. It wasn't cool to be fat. It wasn't cool to be a lot of things, right? And if you were different, you got sort of accepted only if you were exceptional. And I was like failing out of school. So I was not exceptional. I got a little bit of taste of like approval and good attention when I was performing. So I threw my whole body into that, right? And so I was desperate for attention. I was desperate to be liked, all under this umbrella of being really, really defensive. It got to a point where as an adult, like it was sort of hard to even be my friend. Like it was hard to have conversations with me because I was so afraid of being wrong. I was so afraid of being wrong that I thought that it would be the death of me. I thought that people would think less of me, and I was immediately put back into that place when I was a child and I was being ignored and I was going to suffer because of it, right? I was like, no, I have to prove them I'm right. And as you can imagine, that's like a really difficult personality trait to sort of get along with, right? And the other unexpected consequence of that upbringing was that I was really judgmental. There was a time, especially in my early days in college, when I was judgmental. It came from absolutely from insecurity, from fear, from not wanting to be wrong, not wanting to be an outlier or ousted, right? I was cruel in some ways, in a lot of ways. And it was only egged on by the fact that I was also like funny. And that did not help because I was like, oh yes, and that's how people are going to like me, and I'm funny. And that's not great, right? Because I will tell you right now, if you meet somebody that's judgmental, they are judgmental because they hate themselves. Because that judgment, they point on themselves with such a bright and ferocious energy that it is consuming everything. And so it has no other choice but to also spill out into everybody else around them. So being judgmental is harmful to yourself and to everyone around you. It is all wrapped up in this idea that there's some sort of perfection that can be achieved, which is not true and is a tenet of white supremacy, really. It says perfection is expected. And if you're not perfect, you don't deserve care, love, basic needs, anything. And this was a hard lesson for me to learn because I didn't recognize what was happening until I started my witchcraft journey and I got into shadow work, and I was like, cool, yes. I did try some self-investigation. I was asking myself, if this is true, then what? If that is true, then what? If this happens, then what, right? Going all through down the line of possibilities that my mind was connected to. And I realized that I really thought I was going to die if I was wrong, if I was less than perfect, if I didn't get the upper hand on judging people, that I was going to be really suffering. I was going to be abused and outcasted and thrown away. And learning that was eye-opening, but it didn't give me anything to do. So I also sort of flailed around with just like knowing that I was judgmental and considering myself just like a bad person, right? I was a bad person and there's nothing to be done about that. So I had the worst few years of my life after that. So the shadow work didn't just like fix everything, right? Although it's a very good tool and you should do it. What helped me was learning to make it a habit to release myself from the need to be right, to understand that I am not only allowed to be wrong, but that it is so valuable to be wrong, that sometimes you will never learn what you're wrong about or what is the right thing if you never speak the wrong idea, or if you never make a mistake, you'll never learn, right? That's not always the case, but obviously it was what I was going through all the time. And it's not just like, again, I feel like this is one of those things where you're like, that's not a spiritual tool. And I beg to differ. Like, you will not learn to know yourself if you've got all of these barriers of perfection, of not being willing to be made wrong, of not looking at yourself, right? And especially of not being able to change your mind. There is nothing so far away from being spiritually awake and active than being completely rigid and unable to explore other ideas. That does not help you grow or expand. It makes you freeze and crust over, and then you start to break down. And I thought of myself as open-minded. I thought of myself as like so open-minded and open-hearted. And I realized if that was who I wanted to be, then it was who I was somewhere on the inside. And I needed to find tools that would let that be my reality on the outside. So not only did I start to remind myself that I could be wrong, and it's, again, something I still have to do, right? If I'm having a conversation, especially with somebody new who I want to like me or I want to be their friend because I admire them, I will catch myself like being very hypercritical and have to say, here, stop, hold on. You do not have to be wrong. This you are perceiving as a threat, and it is likely not a threat. Right? I have to actively talk to myself. Like, I don't know if anybody else does this, but this is what works for me. And I mean, I laugh, but it saved my life. It saved my life. It saved my relationships. Like, my partner and I have been together for over like a decade now. And like, we started off as friends in 2009. Okay. Friends and college roommates in 2009. And this change is the only reason that we can still be together, that we can be in a relationship, let alone just friends. Like, our friendship would have broken down, and it almost did. And it's because we were both able to sort of see what was going on and let ourselves change, because you will never change if you are afraid forever of not being perfect. And being perfect, that idea is literally just a cookie cutter outline of something that does not exist. We have projected our insecurities onto people in the celebrity realm, into everything, right, outside of us. We have projected all of the media's like messaging about what we should be to be good and who we should be to be loved and appreciated. And we've projected that right back onto the world, and we've decided that there are so many other things that are perfect, but not us. And that's all wrong. It's none of it rooted in the truth at all. And what that does is it has effectively both hands on your throat. It chokes you and freezes you till you can't move, till you can't grow. And not being able to move and grow will hinder your spiritual growth, because that's what life is about. That's what life is about. There isn't anything else but growing, evolving, loving, experiencing, and all those things become impossible when you can't move. So making it a habit to allow myself to be wrong, to allow myself to change my mind when I learn new information, to hold that new information up to the cord of truth inside of me and deciding to embody what actually does feel true and what feels rooted in something that is like deeply honest for me and that is calling to me, right? That resonates. Letting myself be wrong, letting myself change my mind freed me. It's freeing me right now. Like, this video is not going to be perfect. I'm not going to say everything that I want to say in the way that I'd prefer to say it. And I'm still going to upload it. I'm still going to see it because every single day I practice doing as opposed to perfecting. Because if I focus on perfecting, I'll never do anything. I'll never live. I'll never experience the things I want to experience. If I forced myself to never be wrong and I forced myself to be perfect all the time, I would not be who I am today. I would not be in love with the people I'm in love with, and I would not have the career that I have. I would have never connected to the spirits that I've connected with because, every single person connects with the spirits differently. And if I just decided that the first tool that I read about in a book was the only way to do it, then I would have said, that's not me and I can't do it. And I would have moved on. And that would be very sad. Maybe it'd be fine. Maybe I'd be living well, but I wouldn't be living in the activated, fulfilling, and alive feeling that I'm living in every single day. So allow yourself, if that's something you run into, which I'm sure it is, because if you're in America especially, I know that there is a little perfectionist in your mind. There's a little judgmental bitch in your mind being like, ew, it's not cool. It's not cool. It's not cool. And as much as people pretend to like that about you, they don't. They don't. They can't trust you, and they know they can't trust you because you're judgmental. You're judgmental together, and there's no space for honesty. And I'm not like judging you, right? Like, there is a certain level of like judgmental venting that we do when we're kikiing, right? When we're chatting it out, when we're doing chisme, when we're friends. There's a certain level of that is venting, that is gossip for the sake of protecting the community, right? That is getting each other on each other's pages. And I don't think that that's bad, but I think that you know what I'm talking about if it's something that you do, if it's something that you default to, if you're known as the judgmental friend. If you're known as the judgmental friend, you likely have so many secret pains that you don't feel like you can share with anybody. And you can. And you can let yourself change, and you can let yourself grow. And it just has to be a habit. That's the secret, is that it has to be ritualized. It has to be something you commit to over and over and over again. And I commit to it every day, and I will continue to commit to it over and over and over again, because I know that that voice inside of me that is judgmental or that is hypercritical of myself is not just my Virgo rising, but is also that hurt little kid who says, nobody cares about me, nobody listens to me, nobody loves me. And every time that I work on vulnerability, on letting myself hold myself, on letting myself be beautifully imperfect or make a mistake or never get to a place where I feel perfect and done and 10 out of 10, right? Every time I let myself be good and happy with who I am and all the mistakes that I make, I know that I'm actively pouring love all over that kid who just couldn't get enough. And if that is not a revolutionary spiritual practice, then I don't know what is. And I'm grateful that I figured that out. And I'm grateful that I learned those tools every fucking day, because that's why I am who I am. Thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that you found something that was inspiring or useful for you. And I hear you. I can hear you right now being like, Kier, totally love that. But what about like the actual witchy spiritual things? Like, you talk about visualization, but we want more. I get it. And you know what? It's coming. I built this and I was like, I don't want to ignore these tools or these practices because they're not spiritual tools, because I think they're really valuable. So I'm just going to make another video that has strictly tools that are like magical, witchy, or spiritual, actual tools that fit under that umbrella really neatly. That could be tools that you could use to change your life, because they were tools that I used to change mine. And that video is next. So hang in there. Don't worry. But thank you so much for listening to this, because again, I do think that these 5 skills, these 5 practices, these 5 habits, because they changed my life, so extremely and so much for the better, I'm sure that they could have a positive impact on yours. So thank you so much. And I'll see you next week. Thank you so much to my patrons. Y'all know I love you. I love the Rainbow Witches. We are the Rainbow Witches. I just made that up, but what if we had a cheer? Okay. New contest, we're making a cheer. Anyways, if you want to be a part of the Patreon, if you want to hang out with us, we do tarot studies and meditations. There's a bunch of free support in the Discord group. There's a bunch of free resources that are always there every single month. We even do giveaways. It's literally so fun. If you want to be a part of it, you know where to click. The links live in the link box down there. So join us if you're interested. If you want to follow me on Instagram, follow me on Instagram. If you want to subscribe, you should, because that would be so cool of you, and that would be super hot and super awesome, and everyone would love you for it. Thanks so much. Stick around if you like to stick around, and I'll see you later. Stay cool, stay queer. Love you, Mill. Love you, Trill. Bye. Mwah. Bye.